quite a lot of the practice is just a continual, am I doing this right? Checking your posture. And of course, one of the effects of that is to kind of reconnect your attention with your body. So,
Mike, you're not spotlighted again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd actually pinned myself. Right. There you go. Right.
There you are.
Yeah.
That's better. Thank you.
So yes, go nice and easy. Remember that any kind of adjustment should take a while. Don't force yourself into a position just because that's what the textbooks say. And I've had that happen to me. I've had teachers say, this is how you must stand. And I'm standing there feeling as though my knees are being twisted off or something like that. So we have a kind of idea, if you like, of what is good posture. And then we have a sense of where we are. And in a way, you kind of map out a route towards that ideal posture, which, in my experience, to be honest, you never actually reach because you're constantly changing. So this is where we come back to an awareness of some of the things I was talking about last week, the movement, the flow, the quality of movement. The aim in Tai Chi isn't simply about having, if you like, perfect posture, even if such a thing were to exist, but rather to reap the benefits, if you like, of improving your posture. There are, in any case, I think, if I remember correctly, there's 26 different body types defined by Western physiotherapy. I think it's something like 16 male and 9 female. I can't remember the details, but there's all sorts of different body types. And so you're not going to get a posture that is going to suit everybody. And certainly not going to get a posture that's going to suit everybody all the time. So we want to drop our weight down. We don't want to feel that we're straining to hold our weight up. We want to be upright. And through that, we want to get this freer movement. You know, think of that image of a soft breeze blowing on your shoulder, or causing you to move like when a breeze blows on a leaf. So that you're not working against your own body. You're not trying to move in your waist and resisting that movement in your shoulders, shall we say, for instance. Your posture will change over the course of time, over the years of doing Tai Chi, but also from the start of a class to the finish of a class. This is why we, in all physical activities, there's a warm-up, because it takes your body a while to actually get into the right kind of condition to perform the activity. With this particular exercise, if I come a little bit closer, if you think about your head, I can do this, and you can see with this one, my head is moving with my body. There's no discrepancy there. I'm looking straight ahead, my body's turning, and I'm still looking sort of straight ahead as well. That can be quite good, but if your eyes are open, you get this sort of blur in front of your eyes if you're not careful. Another thing, you can close your eyes, of course. Another thing you can do, another way you can do this is if you look now, my body's turning apparently underneath my head. In other words, I'm I'm looking forwards. So what that means is when I turn this way, there's a little bit of a sort of stretch in the side of my neck, there and there. You need to be careful with that because that stretch there could put pressure on the arteries in your neck and affect the blood supply to the brain, which is not a great idea. So don't turn too far, in other words, if that's how you want to do it. There isn't a right and a wrong way in this sense. Just sort of try different ways out and see what suits you. So usually in a room like this, I'm actually looking at the screen, so my eyes are fixed on one thing. If I do this, everything's too close and a bit of a blur. But outside, depending on, if there's a bit of space outside, the other objects are a fair distance away. You're not necessarily having to sort of suffer the blurring. So, as I say, try different ways of doing it. They both have advantages and disadvantages. Another thing you can do with this exercise is to move the weight. So you don't have to do it in a while. I'm going to take a wider stance so you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm moving from side to side. Now, one of the advantages of this is that you directly engage your legs. So if you can play around with this, and you can think of it again in different ways. If I turn, that tends to pull my weight over. So I'm here, I turn, my weight tends to go that way, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, particularly in the wider stance, with my feet turned out a little bit, if I push from here, I've sunk down here, if I push myself over, my body would tend to turn. So both are valid aspects of this movement, of the interaction, if you like, of the center of your body, your hips and your waist, and your legs and your feet. So this is quite a nice little variation. You can either stay with this or go back to having your weight in the middle and raise your arms. One more thing that may happen is this. You may turn and your weight moves the opposite way involuntarily. That is normally down to some kind of stiffening up in your hips or in your lower back, because you turn, you meet a resistance and it pushes your body over. So if you're doing that, obviously it's something we want to try and correct, but don't force yourself to stay in the middle, because you'll be straining against the tension in your body. And then just drop your hands down. Just rolling your weight forwards and backwards. So in Tai Chi, our response to any kind of barrier in the first instance is always going to be a yielding quality. We never want to meet an opposing force head on. So in the first instance, at least, if you meet that tension in your hips or something like that, you want to try and find a way of flowing around it. If in the process of going forwards and backwards, you meet a barrier, so I go forwards here and suddenly I'm feeling as though I'm going to fall over, that's a barrier. And like the sea hitting the rock, I just yield back to it. And gradually we find a change. Once you've got that sort of approach, that we sometimes refer to as a water approach, you might also think, well, hold on, why is that happening? And can I go a little bit further if I do this or this or this? A more analytical, a more kind of, I won't say confrontational, but a more piercing kind of quality. So having yielded before the barrier, you might find a crack in the way that water finds a crack in the rock or something like that. So we've got these two approaches that we can move between in Tai Chi when we meet these things that block the movement. And both, again, can be very useful. And just letting yourself come to rest. And just remember that ideally we would want to have our weight a little bit forwards, just behind the ball of each foot. But what that would do is make you feel as though you're leaning forwards, and that's countered by this dropping back the hips. But for that to happen, you also have to release in the lower part of your back. So again, very, very, very gently. So just sinking down and pushing up. Looking for that flow in the first instance. So I sometimes think, going back to these areas that feel blocked or tight, I have this image of them as being like rocks in the bed of a river, water flowing over them and gradually eroding them. But then, as I say, you might want to take something a little bit more insertive, shall we say, assertive with the particular rock. But be careful with that. It can become a bit obsessive. You think, oh, I'm a bit tight in my shoulder. Maybe if I do this, and then an hour later, it's still tight in your shoulder, but you can't stop thinking about it. So, and that's where we would come back to the water method. The more kind of assertive method is known as the fire method. And then bringing your hands around so you're cradling the ball. What you may find in a session like this or in your own practice is that a combination of exercises has the effect over sort of 20 minutes or half an hour of releasing that tightness and that tension. So don't be in a hurry to let that happen. So one of the reasons I always start with this exercise and Wild Goose and so on and so forth is very straightforward. And almost immediately we can feel how it involves the whole of the body, because our legs compress a little bit and then they straighten a little bit, and that pushes on the hips, push on the shoulders and so on and so forth. So we can start to feel that potential for a flow through the whole of the body. Plus, of course, it has this essential element of sinking down and rooting down. You can follow the route of the movement. When you push up, your hips are pushed up and you feel the movement up your back. And just bring your attention to your spine in the middle of your body. It's almost like somebody's running their finger up your spine. Remember, each vertebra is a little bit independent of the others. So it's a bit like if you had a line of billiard balls on a table and you hit one, and it would sort of be like a train shunting up the row of the balls. And in the same way, each vertebra gently pushes up into the one above it. And imagine that movement going up over the crown of your head and sort of down. In fact, it's a meridian line. It technically ends at the roof of the mouth, but don't worry too much about that. Just going right up. And then from here, as you sink down, you feel your rib cage dropping. And your shoulders dropping. So the downward movement we recognize in the front of the body. And this is a a route, a cycle of movement, sometimes known as the inner orbit or the microcosmic orbit. Two of the major meridians in the body. And they meet, well, they meet at the roof of the mouth and at the base of the torso. And sometimes it can be quite refreshing to focus on that, particularly the upward movement through your back. You're feeling a bit tired, we tend to sort of droop over, and it can just get a sense of energy back into our back and spine. And then change into the wild goose. And that root of the inner orbit is something you can come back to really in any of the exercises as a reference point, a point of focus. Here, though, with your arms going out, there's more of a kind of sideways expansion than in the previous exercise. And then change into the wild to part in the clouds. So now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky, feeling that same sort of movement up the side into your fingers, and then the contraction, and then on the other side. So once we've felt a type of movement in one direction or in one part of the body, it becomes a little bit easier to visualize that in other parts of the body. And the rhythm of expansion and contraction and the connection between sort of different parts of the body is pretty much a constant. And you could, for instance, think in terms of, as with the expansion, think of the spaces between your rib cage. You want something more intricate than that. You could even think of individual cells in the body expanding upwards and outwards into the cells around them. It's all just a matter of how much you want to focus your attention, how deeply you want to focus your attention. One more of these. Now pushing in 4 directions. Here, you're not actively sinking your hips and pushing up. Your hips are hanging back still in the normal way for Tai Chi, but you're not sort of going up and down in the way that we were for the first set of exercises. This helps to refine your attention much more, because that movement down through your body with the pull of gravity, up with the resilience of your body and the ground beneath you, is still present. It's one of the most fundamental cycles of movement in the art, along with the breathing, of course. And it's a constant. It's a constant because gravity is always there with you. But it is very subtle and very hard to notice because we're so used to it. When was the last time you had a chat with a friend and said, how's your gravity today? We talk about the weather all the time, don't we? Because it varies so much. But gravity is a constant and it's there in the background. And most of the time, we barely recognize it. So that's quite a mental effort to really notice that internal movement. That vertical cycle is now, with this exercise, modified through the center of the body with the horizontal rotation, the horizontal turning in your hips and your waist. And by the intent that produces that turning. One more round. Your hands drop down, circling palms. First three we do without the turn. And then if it's comfortable, we do three with the turn. Now switch sides. So there's any number of other changes that take place between one movement and another. But all of them, in a sense, come after what's happening in that basic vertical movement. And so, of course, that's going to really involve our legs a great deal and the horizontal movement, the hips and the waist, because most of the intricate changes are felt above the hips. And then add in the turn. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Here we have another rotation in the center of the body, but a vertical one. You could think of this, if you wished, as a way of really emphasizing that inner orbit, because here your back is lengthening, and then as you come up, you get this sense of dropping through the front. So if you wanted to use a particular exercise to sort of focus on the inner orbit, this might be one that you chose to do that with. But it's also one where we really feel the significance of, again, the center part of the body, our hips, and allowing our hips to drop back, because it's that that brings us to the upright position. One more time. Good. Now I'm going to take a slightly wider stance again, partly because it's easier for you to see, partly because when I'm doing the sideways movement, I do tend to stand slightly wider. It suits me better. You can do this if you want, or keep in your basic stance, but just transferring your weight from side to side. Once we get to the hips and waist, there are any number of variables. Some come more easily to our body than others. So for instance, when I move across, as I noted before, I would tend to turn towards the foot that I'm resting on. I could choose to do that slightly different. I could choose to move across and using an intent to turn, I could turn this way. And so on and so forth. And this is where we start to feel these little changes in the upper body. Very, very simple in the legs. Your weight is either dominant in one leg or another, or maybe in some exercises, sort of resting between the two. The weight can sink, your legs can compress and push up. You can turn left or right with your hips. You could tilt forwards and backwards as we do in rowing a boat. It's pretty much it in terms of the possibilities in the lower part of the body. But then we start to feel the movements in the upper part of the body. So now turning towards the foot. So when you go into your left foot, just turn until it feels as though you're looking in the same direction as the left foot. When you go into the right, same thing. And then hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. For this, we tend to let our heels come off the ground. It gives a little bit more of a dynamic quality to it. So long as that doesn't encourage a loss of alignment. This is where I want to be, here, not here. Now I'm sort of falling. Sinking down and pushing up. Curving motion up, and try and make sure that your hand and your fingers are in alignment. I'll show you what I mean there. If I were pushing my hand through water or something like that, then that would be a very smooth passage. If I did this, there'd be pressure on my fingers and so on and so on, and on my wrist. So I'm looking for that smooth curve through to allow a free passage of movement. So it gives it a circular quality, which we would expect, because your arm's attached at one end and not at the other. And this time, suggest you mirror my movement. So use your right hand, I'm going to use my left. I come around here, and instead of dropping down, I come across the top. So at this point, leave your heel on the ground, and we complete the circle. Just feel how your arm will naturally rotate. Remember what I was saying about not straining against barriers. So when I get to about here, it feels quite nice for the arm to rotate. I come down to here. If I come down to here, I get to about here, I can feel a tightening there. And there may be occasions when I want to sort of work with that, but this isn't one of them. So we have this winding movement. As though you're winding up silk thread. These kind of exercises are referred to as silk reading or silk winding. Quite difficult to maintain a smooth circle over and over again. And then try that with your other arm. So the circle is seen as being the basic unit of movement for the limbs. Again, naturally enough, I suppose. Feel what's happening here in the sides and your back as you go through this movement. Where are you feeling the expansion, contraction? How are you experiencing the knock-on effect of one part of the body stimulating movement in one way or another in the adjacent parts of the body? Think about, the billiard balls in line. More complex than that now, but the connections are still there. And then both hands together, so wave hands like clouds. So we can really begin to focus on that relationship between the center part of our body, our feet and our legs. Really, when I use the term center, depending on how I'm using it, I could be referring to the physical center of the body, as I have been. Or it could be a broader understanding of that actually includes our feet, our legs, the root of the body. And in some movements, you might want to focus on the center turning. In others, you might want to focus on the weight moving. And in a movement like this, of course, you have a choice. But there will always be a point, I hope, where you get beyond this is what the leg is doing, this is what the hips are doing, and just experience the totality of the movement. And that requires you to just let your attention rest. And a good place for that is to let it rest in here, the lower down chair. This is wave hands like clouds. Now come to the middle. Try and have your right hand on top again, mirror my movements, stretching between heaven and earth. Pushing out. Keep your hands in front of your hip, in front of your shoulder. And imagine you've got an elastic band here. What you're doing is quite strong. You've got to push it out. And then you're going to let it contract very slowly. Otherwise, it will just snap your hands together. So both directions, we're really working to like control, to have some sense of intent in the arms. They're not just floating out, they're pushing out and gradually coming back in. And if you think of that, and I suppose another way you can think of it is there's a spring between your hands here, and then you're going to let the spring slowly expand and then compress it. Different ways you can think of it. But if you imagine that resistance, you'll automatically, after a while, start to use more of your body, more of those little connections in the body. And you'll really feel where the movement is working. And I always think it's quite interesting with this one. It's often connected sort of energetically with stomach and spleen. But really, that whole area of the body seems to just, front and back, seems to just extend and contract. As always with this one, there's various stages we can go through. So if you don't want to do them, if you don't feel comfortable with them, that's fine. But if you want to, this time, when you push your right hand up, go into your right leg, try not to lean over. Bring your hands back to the body. You can drop down just a little bit in the middle, come up a little bit, but don't lock the hip and knee as you go into your left. Really make that connection down into the foot. Feel as though by pushing up, you're actually helping to stretch the elastic band. Your foot pushes into the ground, and that's important for the next stages. Because the next time, again, if you're comfortable with this, as you push up, just let the left heel, the opposite heel, rise. You see my knee's gone forwards a little bit too far really, but I wanted you to see what I was doing. Same thing here. So you really, even though your body's extending up, you really feel the weight going down through the leg. Remember that cycle of the inner orbit doesn't alternate. You don't have an upward movement and then a downward movement. Gravity is always there, and there's always the resilience to the pull of gravity. So they're constantly working, and you choose where to put your attention and how to put your attention to a particular place. So part of your choice here must be for the sinking down, and then we can just bring our foot in. Be careful, because it's getting to be a stronger and stronger exercise, of course. You can go down a fair way here if your knees are up to it. And then, of course, we can raise the foot sometimes. One more on each side. and back to the center. Shake out. When we do stretching between heaven and earth, and again, I'll come a little bit closer so you can see what's happening. The hands come together and they slide past each other. They don't quite touch. When we do parting the wild horse's mane, which we're going to do in a moment, something similar happens. The hands come together here and they slide past each other. So the full movement is this. So there's a strong link between stretching between heaven and earth and parting the wild horse's mane. But I think I made the point last week, stretching between heaven and earth, we go to here, maybe here. And it's a nice expansive movement, the open quality, very energetic. I think it's a lovely movement. When we do parting the wild horse's mane, this comes from the Tai Chi forms, and so here it's there. The significance of the Tai Chi forms is that these are potentially fighting movements. You don't want to be like that. You certainly don't want to be like that in the middle of a fight. Not that I know much about fighting, but you get the idea. Yeah. So somehow what we've got to do is to find, if you think of this as containing a lot of energy, lovely open movement, there's at least as much energy here as there would be here, but it's more compacted. It's like if you get a balloon and you blow it up and then you squeeze it in, it feels stronger inside, and so that internal strength really develops, and it's characteristic of the actual Tai Chi Chuan movements, the movements that come from the forms, that they often mimic and shadow the other exercises that we do, but they're invariably more compact. So it's kind of interesting. But going to the wider stance now and transferring your weight from side to side, and again turning. So with your right hand, bring your right hand over in front of your left hip, push forwards, feel the expansion in your body, pushing the arm out until your elbow is above your knee. So here's my elbow above my knee, and it's like I'm resting my elbow on the table and just letting the rest of the arm pivot around that. So to start off with, it's almost as though you're pushing into something with your shoulder and turning. Sometimes what I say to people with this is, imagine you're carrying a cup full of water or something, and you're pushing through a door. You use your shoulder to open the door a bit, then you use your elbow to open it a bit more, and then very carefully you feed the cup through. So the movement winds out from this leg into the fingers. Now try with your left. So there's this connection, and again, imagine the elastic band. Imagine you're standing on the elastic band, and then you're trying to just extend it out with your fingers. You're going to get your whole body behind the movement. And then into the full movement, parting the wild horse's mane here. Coming back, this time the hand at shoulder height. The other hand is now ready to hold the bottom of the ball, move across and turn. And then on the other side. At the end of the movement, the extended movement, your fingers really extend straight out. Your arm and your fingers extend straight out from your shoulder. Your elbow is below shoulder height, but your fingers are about shoulder height. And you can just look across your fingers. So you look out over your fingers. And you let your gaze go with that, and then you're looking across here. Some people do it slightly differently though. Some people look into the palm of the hand. I find that a little bit restrictive. I prefer to look out a little bit. But that can be quite interesting too, because that means that it's quite a precise focusing all the time with your eyes. And I had one teacher who used to talk about parting wild horses men. She used to call them scholars' steps. The idea that because it was done with a stepping movement here, it's like I've got something that I'm reading there. So I suppose that's quite Cambridge, isn't it? One more on each side. Remember that as the movements get to be a bit more complex, part of the value of that is for the mind. It's not just about whether you can achieve these movements physically, but the actual act of trying can have a very profound effect on your awareness. Now have one foot forwards. Transfer on your weight. I'm always reminded of that idea, the effect on the mind when I do part in the Wild Horses Mane, because many of you would have heard this, but it's worth repeating. When I first taught that as what we would call a fixed step exercise, not that long ago, I did a seated exercise with one particular class. And of course, it wasn't very good. It was the first time I'd taught it like that. They'd never done it before. So everybody was kind of waving their arms around. Nobody, this is what happens when you do an exercise for the first time. But in that class, we did half seated, half standing. And at the end of the class, one of the women came up to me and she said, normally when she did the standing and the stepping, she felt very unsteady. But it was much better that day. And she put it down to trying to do part in the Wild Horses Mane. She said, I couldn't do it, but I really had to concentrate. And she felt that the effort to do that and the concentration spilled over into the standing exercises and actually helped her to walk better. So even if you can't do the exercise, there are some very, very important benefits, I think, to doing something like part in the Wild Horses Mane. Now, sit back and just let your toes lift and your heel. So all of these things, the inner orbit, tracing the patterns of movement through your body, all of these things that I talk about have a value in their own right, but they also serve to train our awareness. And with that trained awareness, you can begin to really bring your attention into your foot here. Feel how gravity is working through your body, make any adjustments that you need to, and therefore improve your chances. We will do now taking the step. And then on the other side. So nothing is all in the mind, but nothing is all in the body either. And so what we do in Tai Chi, we cultivate that area where mind and body overlap. And to an extent where it's very hard to say which is which, and you know, it's just one thing. If you like. But three things overlap. One is, you know, the body with its amazing mechanics and physical connections and processes. One is the mind and all its aspects. And the final one is the movement, the energy. And these are the three treasures in Tai Chi. And raising your toes and your heel. And again, at any given time, in any particular movement, it may be that your focus is in one area, but that's never to the exclusion of the other two. And then step in. And then if you've got room, either forwards or backwards, take a few steps. And when you've gone as far as is appropriate, do the opposite movement, the opposite step in. Notice how my foot comes in, circles around and out. And with the circle, there's that basic unit of movement for the limbs. And bring your feet down. I've obviously talked too much this class because I'm running out of time. So what we'll do, we'll go straight into doing the exercises in a little sequence, because I think it's really nice to be able to do these sequences. The three movements that we'll combine will be this one, the rotating of the arms with the transfer of the weight, just feeling how that rotation comes and invokes the energy of the chest and the upper back, and also serves to bring your arms together. The second movement will be fisherman castanet. The third movement will be pushing a wave. And they have subtle differences, but they're all very much connected. So it doesn't matter which foot you have forward. Start with your weight back, hands turned out. And that should be sufficient just to open your chest and to roll your hands back. So first of all, going forwards here. Just do that again to get used to the movement. And then this time, we're going to change to fisherman castanet. And then pushing a wave, pushing the boat. At the end of the movement, let your hands flatten down, come out, start again. Very, very subtle differences between the movements. Just see what you can observe. And as you become more familiar with the sequence, notice the intent behind the movement. You know what's coming. And so your mind engages with the body. Let's do one more round on this side. change over. So there's a pillar, a post there, curving around. Fishermen cast a net. And it's not the end of the world if you get them mixed up, but we try to keep them precise because again, that's the mind training. And remember, focusing your attention in this way is a route to a very deep quietness and stillness, calmness. One more time. And bring your feet down. Rub your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. The other side. Lunge your back. The hips. Legs. Nice and light on your belly. And onto the upper part of your chest. Lovely, and then embrace tiger, return to the mountain. As always, focusing on that real sense of settling and quietening, sinking down and then pushing up. Wrapping your arms around, feeling already the pull of gravity on your hips. So just a natural, if you like, thing like that, dropping down into that quieter space, followed by the extension outwards and the whole cycle starting again. Do one more. Just let your hands come down and for a few moments, just rest on your belly and see if you can feel just a gentle movement there, rise and fall as you breathe in and out. And shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody.